I still wake in a cold sweat, remembering my summer at Blackwood Pines Camp, a place that once promised freedom and adventure, but quickly revealed a nightmare lurking in its shadows. I was only 13, full of tentative excitement for the long, sun-drenched days, when I first encountered Mr. Harlan, our camp counselor. His silver hair and weathered face lent him an air of experience, yet something in his smile struck me as eerily off, as though he concealed secrets too dark for any child to fathom. At first, Mr. Harlan was a gentle presence. I remember how he'd casually join us as we scrubbed down our cramped cabin, or how his low, reassuring voice made even the simplest task seem like an act of camaraderie. "Everything's gonna be just fine, kid," he'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But as the weeks passed, unsettling whispers began to echo through the bunk halls. Other campers muttered behind closed doors about how the older counselor's gaze lingered a moment too long, and how his behavior seemed to border on the grotesque. One late afternoon, as the golden light of sunset bathed the camp's worn tennis courts, my heart pounded not with the thrill of play, but with an inexplicable dread. I stood there with a few friends, laughing and tossing a ball, when I noticed Mr. Harlan's presence at the edge of the court. His eyes tracked our every movement. At first, I thought he was simply admiring our energy, but then I saw it, a grin that stretched too wide, reminiscent of a deranged carnival clown. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, a chill that had nothing to do with the fading heat of the day. The terror escalated one fateful night after a hot shower. I was alone in the cramped, echoing bathroom when I reached for a bottle of shaving cream, my fingers trembling with a mix of curiosity and nerves as I navigated the unfamiliar sensations of early adolescence. Suddenly, I felt a heavy, unnerving grip on my arm. I whipped around, and there he was, Mr. Harlan looming over me, his face contorted into a mask of fury as he hissed in a voice so cold and threatening that my blood ran ice cold. "Listen here, kid. Don't you ever touch what isn't yours, or I swear I'll make you regret it." I was paralyzed, each word pounding against my ears as if echoing in an empty chamber of terror. I managed only a stuttering, frightened yes, as my mind reeled in disbelief. The grip on my arm was like a vice, and I felt every second stretch into an eternity of humiliation and fear. I left the bathroom shaking, my heart pounding as if trying to escape the horror that had just unfolded. Then came the night that shattered any lingering hope of safety at Blackwood Pines. It was a moonless evening, the kind where darkness feels almost tangible, and our cabin was unusually silent. I remember creeping back to our room after a late night of restless sleep, when suddenly a blood-curdling scream erupted from somewhere down the hall. My pulse shot through the roof as I bolted out of my bed, my every instinct telling me that something unspeakable was happening. Inside another cabin, I later learned, a group of terrified young girls had witnessed the unspeakable. They described how, in a moment of depraved debauchery, Mr. Harlan had been found in the most compromising position, a crude display of his vile intentions that left them paralyzed with fear and disgust. I recall sitting at breakfast the next morning, the air heavy with an unspoken sorrow, as hushed voices and tearful glances confirmed the nightmare from the night before. Even as the counselors restrained him and the police dragged him away, a part of me felt that this horror would forever haunt the woods of Blackwood Pines. To this day, Every creak of a wooden floor or unexpected shadow in the twilight takes me back to that summer. I left the camp with the bitter knowledge that monsters often wear the most trusted masks, and that sometimes the scars you bear on your soul are the deepest of all. I've always been fascinated by abandoned places, the silent relics of forgotten histories that hide mysteries in every creaking board and shattered window. One autumn evening, driven by equal parts boredom and daring, my friends Lucas and Ethan and I decided to explore Hollow Creek Ranch, a desolate estate rumored to be cursed by its tragic past. We arrived under a bruise-colored sky, the sun dipping low behind skeletal trees. A rusted, imposing fence guarded the property, and we worked together to slice through it using a pair of wire cutters. As I stepped over the threshold, I felt an almost palpable shift in the air, as if the very atmosphere was warning me to turn back. But curiosity, a dangerous, irresistible force, pushed us onward. The mansion that loomed ahead was a decaying behemoth, its once proud facade now crumbling into neglect. Ivy crawled up its walls like dark veins, and boarded windows stared blankly like the eyes of long-dead souls. Beside the mansion stood an ancient wooden barn, its timbers groaning under the weight of centuries. Every step we took seemed to disturb the silence of a place that time had forgotten. Inside the mansion, the darkness was suffocating. Moonlight fought its way through a shattered window, casting ghostly beams over a scene of decay. The smell was unbearable, a mix of rotting wood, decomposing fabric, and something far more foul, like the stench of spoiled milk mixed with decay. We moved cautiously down a narrow hallway lined with peeling wallpaper and scattered remnants of old, faded photographs. In each portrait, the subjects, stern-faced and unnervingly expressionless, seemed to watch our every move, their eyes dark voids that promised no mercy. Our exploration was abruptly shattered when Lucas, in a moment of careless clumsiness, knocked over a delicate glass ornament. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the vast emptiness, and for a few seconds, the silence was so profound that it felt as though the mansion itself was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere upstairs, heavy, deliberate footsteps began to sound. Each step a grim punctuation in the silence that followed. Panic seized us. Ethan and I exchanged terrified glances, our breaths coming in rapid, shallow gasps. "We need to hide," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We scrambled for cover. Ethan squeezed into a narrow cupboard behind a moth-eaten curtain, while I dove beneath a battered old sofa. My heart thudded in my chest so violently that I was sure it would burst. Every creak from above made my skin crawl with fear. The footsteps crept closer until, in a moment that seemed to stretch into infinity, a gaunt, disheveled figure appeared at the top of the staircase. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but I could make out his hollow eyes and a twisted smirk that spoke of unholy intent. Lucas, who had been huddled near the doorway, suddenly let out a strangled cry as the figure reached out toward him. In a burst of desperate courage, I grabbed a shard of glass that had glinted in the moonlight and lunged forward. The act of violence was frantic, raw, and fueled by the primal need to survive. The man shrieked, a sound so gut-wrenching it still echoes in my dreams. Chaos erupted as we scrambled out of our hiding spots. The disheveled intruder recovered quickly, and the sound of his labored breaths and curses filled the air as he pursued us through the labyrinthine corridors of decay. We bolted for the basement, our only hope of escape, but every step felt like a descent into a living nightmare. As we reached a window too high to jump from without help, we pressed ourselves against the cold, damp wall, and in that frozen moment of terror, I caught a glimpse of the intruder standing in the upstairs window, his eyes burning with a malevolent promise that this was not the end. We managed to force our way through the window, our limbs aching and hearts shattered by the relentless fear that clung to us. Even as we fled across the overgrown fields toward the broken fence, the image of that gaunt figure haunted my every step. To this day, I wonder what dark force had taken refuge in that forsaken mansion, and what unspeakable plans might have been in store for us if we hadn't managed to escape. For years, I carried the weight of a badge, believing it to be a shield against the night's terrors. But nothing could have prepared me for the inferno that erupted one fateful October evening in Alderridge City. A night that would forever alter my sense of safety and my very soul. I was on patrol during the unsettling chill of an autumn night when a frantic call shattered the mundane rhythm of my shift. The dispatcher's voice trembled over the radio. There was an altercation in Crescent Park, a place that, until then, I'd considered a quiet retreat from urban chaos. A man wielding a hammer was reported to be attacking another, his rage uncontained and his eyes wild with something unrecognizable. I sped through the darkened streets, my mind racing as I tried to piece together the fragments of a story that was rapidly spiraling out of control. As I neared the park, the scene unfolded like a scene from a nightmare. Reports had updated in real time. Now the suspect, known to me later as Derek, had switched his weapon, a flaming stick that burned with a furious, almost otherworldly intensity. The park was drenched in flickering shadows, and the distant wail of sirens only deepened the dread that gripped me. I remember the moment I turned onto a narrow alleyway near the park. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning refuse. I caught sight of Derek darting between pools of light and shadow, his face contorted with deranged purpose as he clutched the burning torch. I shouted a firm command, "Alderridge PD, stop!" But my voice was swallowed by the roar of chaos and the crackle of flames. In the frenzy of that moment, I made a fateful error. I leaped from my patrol car without properly securing the door. In the blink of an eye, as I sprinted toward Derek, he hurled the flaming stick straight at my car. I remember the searing heat as the flames licked at the metal, igniting a rapid spread of fire that transformed my once protective vehicle into a blazing trap. Desperation overtook me, and I fired off several shots into the night, each one an attempt to stop the madness. Even as I watched in horror as my car lurched backward, its momentum carrying me off the seat. Time slowed to a crawl. I was thrown onto the cold, unforgiving pavement, my ears filled with the deafening roar of fire and chaos. Pain seared through my body as I scrambled away from the inferno that threatened to consume me. Every breath I took was laced with the pungent scent of burning rubber and melting metal. In those agonizing moments, I felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Backup arrived minutes later, a flurry of flashing lights and frantic voices as fellow officers subdued Derek with a stun gun, their faces etched with relief and shock. I was rushed to the hospital, where I spent hours patching up wounds and grappling with the surreal realization of how narrowly I had escaped death. The incident left me with deep, haunting scars, both physical and psychological, that would shadow every subsequent day. In the aftermath, as I sat in the sterile silence of my hospital room, I couldn't shake the vision of that night. The fiery glow of a burning patrol car, Derek's unhinged eyes, and the echo of my own panicked heartbeat. I eventually traded my badge for a quieter career in communications. But even now, when darkness falls and the wind carries distant sirens, I am transported back to that infernal night. It remains a grim reminder that sometimes the line between order and chaos is as fragile as a spark, and that even those sworn to protect can find themselves at the mercy of their own worst nightmares. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more horror stories. Goodbye.